All right, let's dive right into this explainer and uncover the deeply moving history of Indian indentured laborers in Mauritius. We're not just looking at a dry timeline of events here. We're talking about a profound human story, one that's literally written in the salt of the Indian Ocean. We're going to look at what exactly tempted hundreds of thousands of people to make a grueling journey across the world, the actual deals they signed, and the shocking reality of what happened when they finally washed up on those shores.
So it begs the question, right? How did a highly deceptive deal end up transforming an entire nation? We're going to explore this massive gap between the sunny, golden promises made to Indian villagers and the dark, frankly harsh reality they actually faced. We'll see how a complete demographic shift occurred, turning what was once a colonial outpost into a modern nation defined by the sheer resilience of people who were sold a total dream that, well, quickly turned into a nightmare.
Section 1. The Demand for Labor, an Island in Need.
To really understand this, we got to go back a bit. Mauritius, sitting out there east of Madagascar, was essentially passed around between European powers for centuries. You had the Dutch occupying it in 1638, then the French took over in 1715. They actually renamed it Isle de France and brought over enslaved people from Madagascar and East Africa. Fast forward to 1810, the British invaded and took control. But the massive turning point, that happened in 1833, when the British finally abolished slavery.
Now suddenly, Franco-Mauritian plantation owners and sugar oligarchs had a huge problem on their hands. About 65,000 African and Malagasy enslaved people were freed, and, completely understandably, they had a deep disdain for the brutal agricultural labor that had defined their captivity. So they naturally quit the sugarcane fields en masse, choosing instead to become fishermen, craftsmen, or subsistence farmers. Suddenly, these massive sugar empires desperately needed a brand new workforce to keep their wealth flowing.
Section 2. A Deceptive New Deal. The Mirage.
So how did the British solve this? They turned to recruiters known as architartas. Think of these architartas as highly persuasive, almost predatory salespeople. They targeted men and women in crowded Indian villages, convincing hopeful people to line up and sign contracts. And here's the kicker. Many of these villagers couldn't even read what they were signing. The architartas only pitched this amazing deal, deliberately leaving out the harsh realities, like the brutal, scorching tropical sun and the incredibly short thorns of the sugar fields.
They completely fabricated this gorgeous mirage. They even gave Mauritius a new name, calling it Marich Desh. They spun tales to these villagers of a promised land, a place of total stability and wealth, where literally you could find gold just sitting under the stones. Honestly, it was a beautiful, irresistible illusion for people who were just hoping for a brighter future.
But wow, the truth was something else entirely. These laborers, who were mostly brought over from the Bhojpuri-speaking regions of Bihar and Uttar Pradesh, genuinely thought they were heading toward land ownership and fair wages. In reality, they were being locked into a rigid system of indentured labor. They were signing away 5 long years of their lives for a meager 5 rupees a month. And sure, there was a vague promise of a return trip to India at the end of it all, but that repatriation process was deliberately poorly organized.
Section 3. Surviving the Kalapani. The Journey.
The reality check hit fast. The exact moment these hopeful families stepped onto the ships to cross the Kalapani, the black water of the ocean, that beautiful deal they were sold just completely unraveled. The journey was unimaginably long and grueling. We're talking massively overcrowded wooden ships, food was incredibly scarce, and disease, it was rampant. So many fell sick, leaving them with absolutely nothing but each other, sharing stories and songs just to find a shred of comfort.
And you have to understand the scale here. This wasn't just a handful of ships. Between 1834 and 1920, an astonishing 700,000 Indian indentured laborers arrived at Port Louis. That is a massive influx of people, and it included not just folks from the Bhojpuri-speaking regions, but also huge numbers of Tamils, Telugus, and Marathis.
When they finally arrived, they docked at a place called the Apravasi Ghat. As these exhausted laborers climbed the stone steps there, the full weight of their situation set in. They quickly realized they weren't free settlers at all. They were indentured. And in a profoundly dehumanizing process right at arrival, their individual human names were systematically stripped away and replaced by numbers.
Section 4. Life on the Plantations. The Harsh Reality.
Life on the estates was brutal. The living conditions, think massive, dark sheds where up to 1,000 immigrants were packed together, sleeping on rock-hard floors covered with bitumen. And those 5 rupees a month they were promised? Yeah, those wages were often just not paid at all. If a worker missed a day or tried to run away from the punishing sun and heavy labor, their contracts were automatically extended as a penalty. Or worse, they were outright punished and thrown in jail. The estate owners essentially had them trapped.
Yet, despite these grueling, literally back-breaking conditions, the human spirit is just incredible, isn't it? At night, finally away from the watchful eyes of the estate owners, they would gather around the fire. They sang, they shared whatever tiny bit of food they had, and they celebrated the festivals they'd brought with them all the way from back home. Against all odds, they found joy, they passed on their stories, and they held onto their humanity in an entirely inhumane system.
Section 5. Reclaiming their identity. From laborers to leaders.
So what happens next? Well, after their 5-year indenture period finally ended, a massive 2/3 of these laborers actually chose to settle in Mauritius permanently. They started setting down roots, opening up small businesses, or working their own plots of land. Right around this time, free immigrants, like merchants and businessmen from Gujarat and Sindh, started arriving too. As the community swelled, the principles of the Arya Samaj movement really began to take hold within the Hindu population, sparking this powerful, organized demand for basic social justice and better labor rights.
Over the decades, this community really started to find its political voice. In 1899, despite some heavy British opposition, a law passed allowing children born on the island to actually acquire French nationality. Then, we hit a massive milestone in 1926. Dhanpath Lala and Rajkumar Gujador became the very first Indo-Mauritians elected to the Legislative Council. All of this active involvement in labor and political rights slowly built up, culminating decades later when Mauritius finally achieved independence in 1968.
Section 6. The Legacy of Mauritius. A Modern Triumph.
Let's look at what this all means today. Modern Mauritius has a population of about 1.3 million people, and an absolutely incredible 68% of that population are Mauritians of Indian descent. This vibrant diaspora is mostly Hindu, living right alongside Muslim, Christian, and Buddhist minorities.
This massive demographic shift created a genuinely dominant legacy. Just look at the leadership. Since independence, all of the country's presidents, with just one exception, Karl Hoffman, have been Indo-Mauritian. Same goes for the prime ministers, with Paul Berenger being the sole exception. Because nearly half the country is Hindu, most Hindu celebrations are major national public holidays. And of course, you can feel that deep, vibrant Indian influence infused into everything: the local cuisine, the music, the arts, and the massive popularity of Indian films across the island.
But here's the really brilliant takeaway from all of this. It's how the country actually manages this demographic dominance. Despite the Indian influence, the mother tongue for almost everyone remains Mauritian Creole. The political institutions are specifically, carefully designed to make sure every single ethnic group is represented. This very active commitment to pluralism creates a deep sense of justice and equity, and that is exactly what has allowed Mauritius to maintain incredible peace and political stability, completely avoiding the ethnic fragmentation we see in so many other parts of the world.
This entire history is just remarkable. It really is a story written in the salt of the Indian Ocean. It's a perfect example of shared progress rising straight out of the ashes of those deceptive, cruel contracts. What began as this totally false promise of Marich Desh evolved into a genuine triumph of resilience, universal brotherhood, and incredible strength. The descendants of those same laborers who slept on bitumen floors are now the teachers, the doctors, and the leaders of a thriving modern nation.
As we wrap up this explainer, it leaves us with a really profound question to think about. Knowing the immense, unimaginable courage it took to cross the Kalapani and build such a peaceful, equitable society from scratch, how will the vibrant spirit and resilience of these historical pioneers continue to guide the pluralistic future of Mauritius? It's an inspiring legacy for sure, and one that challenges all of us to look at how history's deepest struggles can actually forge tomorrow's greatest strengths.